Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Kosher Curiosities series. This is our 11th installment of the class, and this is our final installment on the discussion of bugs. For the last couple of shiurim, we've discussed the source of eating bugs, the problem with eating bugs, and last class we actually looked at the opinions with regard to very, very small insects in vegetables and what the halachic status of them are. We mentioned that according to the halacha, these small insects that we cannot see are perfectly fine if they are in our vegetables and our fruits, and we can eat them because we cannot see them. And halacha only forbids us to consume bugs that we can see. However, there's a very, very strict opinion, the most extreme, that says that we really have to do everything we can to get those bugs out. And then there's the middle ground, which most people follow, which is washing and rinsing and doing what we need to as much as we can, and that's pretty much it. And then you can go along and eat it. Today, we're going to give some concrete examples of certain vegetables and fruits that may contain these small little insects, and speak about them and tell and show the halacha so that people can know what to do and how to act depending on where they are in those three levels. Normally, I read from the Sefer Pinine Halacha and I translate, but today, just for the sake of time, I want to finish this series. I want to go through all the different scenarios and situations, different food products, and talk about them. So I've just translated it, and we're going to just speak out each case individually. So let's begin. There are some vegetables that contain tiny insects that cannot be removed through washing, through inspection. The very common vegetable with bugs is that of cauliflower and broccoli. These are vegetables that contain a significant amount of bugs in a very significant portion of the florets that which conceal these insects, and it's almost impossible to detect these bugs without completely dismantling the florets and examining each type, each tiny part for a very extended period. You can soak it in water, water and soap, but that's also insufficient because the water does not really penetrate the hidden areas to remove those bugs completely. So, according to the strict opinion, the strict of the three opinions, the only way to eat cauliflower and vegetables and broccoli would be to totally discard the florets, which are about 40% of the vegetable, and consume only the remaining stems or the cobs through washing. Or you can buy cauliflower and broccoli that are grown under optimal conditions, special conditions which prevent insects from penetrating. According to the basic halacha, as we mentioned, there is no requirement to search for these tiny insects. All you need to do is wash the vegetables well, because as long as the insects are not visibly present, they could be eaten. But ideally, we should soak these vegetables with water or soapy water for a few minutes. Then rinse it under water, rinse the vegetable under the water, and again, that is the middle ground. The reason is, unlike lettuce and leafy greens, which after soaking and washing often contain no insects or maybe even an insignificant amount, cauliflower and broccoli, you don't get that result. Soaking and rinsing is not enough. But since these vegetables are often cooked and boiled, cauliflower and broccoli, sometimes the insects dissolve during the cooking and they lose their status as a distinct creature. And if that's the case, this can be the middle ground approach. So either you wash well in soapy water and then rinse, that is fine. Or you can cook. If you cook and boil the broccoli and cauliflower, that is also enough to consume these vegetables. The next vegetable we're going to talk about is corn on the cob. According to the strict opinions about corn on the cob, one should not eat the kernels directly from the cob, which means holding the cob and biting into the corn. And the reason is because often tiny insects are hidden in between the corn kernels. And the only way to eat corn on the cob, according to the strict opinion, is to cut the kernels off the cob and then wash them thoroughly to make sure that no insects remain in the on the cob, or sorry, in the corn. But according to the basic halacha and the middle approach, that is not necessary. Basically, because we don't see these insects, it's not something that we are there can be visibly seen, and therefore, because we are uncertain if they're even there, it's sufficient just to rinse the cob well, and then you can eat directly from the cob. Next vegetables we're going to speak about is green onions or and leeks. The strict opinion will require you to cut the green onions or the leeks vertically in half, soak them in soapy water, and scrub them very well, because maybe there are bugs inside the leaves of the onions and the leeks. But again, according to basic halacha, there is no concern, because these bugs are not visible to the average person. Now, if you want to take the middle ground approach, then probably cut the vegetables about 3 centimeters from the base where the bulb connects to the leaves, where in that part of the leek or the green onion, the scallion, you might have a higher percentage of infestation. So then you would separate the remaining leaves, soak them in water with some sort of soap, and you don't need to cut them in half. So that would be the middle ground. Strawberries. Now, strawberries is a very highly argued and discussed subject amongst Jews all over the world with regards to strawberries and the bugs, the tiny mites that can be found in strawberries. These bugs can be so small, they're about a third of a millimeter in size. And sometimes they hide under the small seed in the grooves of the strawberry surface. According to the strict opinion, these regularly grown commercial strawberries pretty much can't be eaten unless you peel off the outer peel. It'd be almost impossible to get rid of these bugs. Even soaking them with a dissolving agent like soap is, often does not do the job. But according to the halacha, again, because these mites are not visible to the average person, there is no obligation to search for them. The middle ground would be to cut off the stem, because often that is where most of the bugs are. Soak the strawberries in water with a dissolving agent and rinse them well. This would apply as well to raspberries and mulberries. According to halacha, strawberries, raspberries, mulberries can be eaten, contrary to what you have heard and what other people tell you and what maybe other hashgacha agencies want to tell you. You are allowed to eat these fruits, these vegetables. There are borei pri adama, strawberry, but you are allowed to eat them. You cannot see these bugs. Middle ground, we wash them, we rinse them, soapy water, chazaku baruch, that's good, but you are allowed to eat these berries. Let's move on. Certain fruits, such as figs, guavas, dates, apricots, sometimes contain insects and should be opened and checked before eating them. Fresh and dried figs, in particular, require a very careful inspection, because the insect actually resembles the interior of the fruit. But there is no concern for what people cannot see. Guavas often contain worms and need to be cut in half or in quarters for inspection. Any fruit with signs of rotting should be examined, because often the insects find their way in the decayed area. Nuts, such as cashew nuts, sometimes the nuts are infested. Signs of infestation might be something like white webbing or bite marks. If you see those, good to check the cashews. If the insects are only found around the nut and removing the webbing reveals the nut intact, then you can eat the nut. It's not an issue. If you have packaged dry fruits, such as raisins, also should be checked for certain webbing or powdery residue, which indicates some infestation. And if that's the case, then you need to check the raisins. Sometimes it's best to just throw the raisins away. The next thing I want to talk about is scale insects on citrus fruits. Sometimes you might see some black dots on citrus peels that are caused by tiny scale insects, less than half a millimeter, and they attach themselves to the peel and they secrete a protective covering. Now, there's a very big halachic debate with regards to their status. The strict opinion argues that since the insect's protective shells are visible and the insects themselves can be seen when they are crawling, so the people who are preparing food with citrus peels have to remove them. And additionally, when you're peeling an orange, you have to ensure that the insects don't transfer to the fingers, and then your finger is going to touch other food. That's a strict opinion. The more lenient opinions hold that there is no concern because without the protective layer, the insects wouldn't be visible to the naked eye and the average person. And even if you do notice them, we're probably going to assume that it's just dirt. And especially true when you have a black dot on a peel and you're unsure and unclear whether or not that's dirt or an insect shell. And even if it is a scale insect covering, the insect itself may no longer be present because often there are males and female insects. When the males leave, the female insects eventually deteriorate, and once they deteriorate, they have no halachic significance. So the lenient view generally is followed when it comes to scale insects on citrus peels. Let's move now to grains such as rice and legumes. Sometimes they contain insects that developed in the kernel or among the kernels while in field or in the storage. The higher the crop, the better the quality, the cleaner, the colder the storage, the less chances that you will find these insects and lower likelihood of infestation, especially due to consumer demand of people wanting clean products. These storage conditions have improved over time and the storage durations have shortened. So therefore, if you're buying rice and legumes from reputable stores and clean stores, the risk of infestation is extremely low, and therefore you don't have to check these grains. Only if you have a package that shows signs of prolonged or improper storage, in that situation, then you have to check. And if you do happen to find one insect in a package of rice, halakha says you have to inspect the entire package. It's not just, okay, I only found one, it's an off chance and forget about the rest. No, you gotta inspect the rest of the package. If you find webbings or crumbs or powder, there's a likely chance of infestation, and therefore you need to examine it well. And yes, we do have food companies today that, thank God, maintain a very high level of hygiene standards and are willing to replace things right when they notice a little bit of infestation to replace it with new products. But nevertheless, we have to keep an eye on it. But when you have grain that is sold in bulk or in old packaging or from stores that may not keep or maintain the cleanliness, then these grains need to be spread out on the surface and checked to make sure that there are no bugs. Chickpeas and beans. There are two concerns with chickpeas and beans and similar legumes. Number one, we are like with the other grains, they might have insects. And two, sometimes you have flies and gnats that lay eggs inside them, which develop into larvae. And that larva will eventually break through the outer shell and emerge. They appear like a black dot on the surface, but when you press them on both sides, the larvae can be squeezed out and even move slightly. Now, since these larvae are not visible when they're dry, they need to be soaked. These legumes need to be soaked in boiling water for about 30 minutes or in lukewarm water for about 8 hours. And that causes the outer shell to become translucent and making it impossible to inspect the kernels. When you buy these legumes, such as chickpeas, from reputable companies with proper storage, then again, inspection is unnecessary. Just check quickly with your eyes, and that's fine. But if they have been on the shelf for a long period of time, or they're stored improperly, or purchased from a less reliable company, or you buy them in bulk, then you need to thoroughly check the chickpeas. Flour. Now, flour is a very, very important subject to discuss. A lot of people think that, oh yeah, I just buy flour from the store. Now, what could be wrong with flour? It's not a fruit. It's not a vegetable. My flour looks very clean. I'm okay to use any flour. Well, not necessarily. If insects develop in the flour but have not left the flour, then there's no prohibition. There's nothing wrong. Because like we said earlier, I think last class, that the status is like insects found inside detached fruit. And as long as the insect has not separated itself from the fruit, then they're not forbidden. But if the insects are visible in the flour and there's a likelihood that they were removed or and then returned to the flour, then many authorities actually say that these insects are prohibited. Now, there's a debate amongst the poskim regarding standard flour, whether it needs to be inspected or not. Many rule that because of safek sveka, a double doubt, the checking is unnecessary. What is the double doubt? Doubt number one is there might not be any insects in the flour. That's number one. And doubt number two is that even if there are insects present, they may not have separated. They may not have moved from their spot. They're not forbidden. That's one way of looking at it. And those rabbis would say it is fine to not inspect flour. Others say that since the insects are sometimes found in the flour, and the flour can easily be sifted, it's not a very difficult process, that one should not rely on the safek sveka, the double doubt. And therefore, the Jewish custom has become to sift flour whenever possible before use. However, if you did not sift your flour before use, everybody holds that the food that you baked or the food that you cooked, it remains kosher and you don't have to worry about it. Now, if you have the custom to sift flour, what type of sieve should you use? So the strict opinions would say that you require a sieve of 70 mesh, which means 70 holes per square inch, to remove the very, very tiny insects. They call them flour mites, slightly larger than a grain of flour and can only be removed through a very dense sieve. But the standard halacha says you don't need that fine of a sieve. You can use a regular 30 mesh, that's 30 holes per square inch. And the reason is, number one, because the primary halachic position, like we mentioned, is that these tiny insects do not need to be considered. Number two, as long as the insects are not separated from the flour, they are not prohibited. And three, they are unlikely to have moved in and out of the flour. In the past, flour commonly became infested, and this was because of two reasons. Number one, the milling was incomplete. It left the eggs intact, which allowed insects to hatch in the flour. And second, it was through external contamination, where the flying and crawling insects laid eggs in the flour. Baruch Hashem, today we have a lot of technological advancements. There's consumer demand for clean products, and flour has considerably improved, even in developed countries. And therefore, the reliable countries make sure to ensure thorough milling, which destroys most of the eggs, and they also use heat and nitrogen gas as well to eliminate any remaining ones. Therefore, then the flour is packaged and sealed in bags to prevent any contamination. But if the flour is stored improperly on the floor in unclean areas for extended periods, then there's a higher risk for infestation because insects can and will pierce the packaging and lay eggs inside. So what are the guidelines for flour inspection? So if you have white flour that is sealed in a package from reliable brands, we can assume that flour is insect-free. No sifting is required. But if you're pouring the flour inside a bowl, just a quick little check is great. If you buy flour from bulk sources or less reliable storage, then it should be sifted. And even flour from trusted brands should be sifted if stored for long periods in suboptimal conditions. Commercial kitchens should always sift their flour due to bulk purchasing. Commercial kitchens usually buy their flour from bulk, and also storage challenges. If you have a bag of flour that is opened, it can also become infested, even if because it's left exposed, unless you close it well. So if you have your flour sitting out in warm weather, even for a few hours, that can lead to infestation. And to prevent this, one thing that you can do is store your flour in the refrigerator. I know it's not a common practice, but if possible to do that, that is recommended. If frequent infestation is noticed for a particular brand or a store, then that flour should always be sifted. And if the infestation occurred as a one-time because of a poor storage issue, then that brand's reliability will remain intact. Lastly, whole wheat flour. Whole wheat flour requires sifting because it is coarsely milled. And because it's coarsely milled, it may retain the eggs. Some companies do treat the whole wheat flour with nitrogen, as we mentioned, and they vacuum seal it and they make it safe without sifting. If the whole wheat flour is kept in a cold area, refrigerator, that is fine because the eggs do not hatch in those conditions. If you're unsure, always make sure to sift and check. Moving away from flour, we have two more issues that we're going to tackle tonight. The first one is that of meat. Worms that are found in the flesh of a living, domesticated, or a wild animal, or a living bird are forbidden. If they entered from the outside, they were already prohibited. If they came from the outside, if a fly flew into a piece of meat, then of course it's prohibited because that fly was crawling. If they developed within the flesh, then just as it's forbidden to eat the meat without proper slaughter, so too it's forbidden to consume worms that developed within it. Even after slaughter, the worms remain prohibited because slaughter only permits the meat of the animal or the meat of the bird, but it does not permit the worms within it. However, worms that developed in the flesh of an animal or bird after slaughter are not forbidden. Because they follow that rule of worms that were found in detached fruit. As long as the worm has not left its original place, they are not considered prohibited. The same applies to worms that developed in cheese. If they have not separated from the cheese, then they are not forbidden. Nevertheless, we do have the issue of Baal Teshaketsu. Baal Teshaketsu, we spoke earlier, is a feeling of disgust, and therefore we should not be eating these worms due to this prohibition because simply it is disgusting. Meat sold in reputable stores, in your supermarkets, is free of infestation because there is strict adherence to hygiene and health regulations that prevents diseases, that prevent contamination, and inhibits the development of worms in the meat. However, during food preparation, during serving, the meat needs to be protected from all insects and all flies. In large kitchens, for example, or during the summertime, it's very important to make sure that this happens. Maybe install some screens in your kitchen, fly traps to prevent infestation of meat and other food products. Worms that develop in the flesh of fish, whether the fish is alive or dead, are not forbidden as long as they do not leave the flesh. This is different than we said by meat, where only worms that developed after the shchita, after the slaughter, is permitted. But in fish, even if the worms developed while the fish was alive, they are considered part of the fish's flesh, which is kosher without requiring any slaughter. If worms entered the fish from an external source, then they are prohibited because they were prohibited even before they entered the fish. So if you find a worm inside a fish's intestines or around its mouth or its gills or attached to its skin, these worms are prohibited because they originated from the water which the fish lived. And this is a very common occurrence. And therefore, it's preferable to purchase fish with reliable hashgacha, making sure that the fish is free of worms. If such fish are unavailable, or when you are buying a live fish from the market, then make sure to discard the innards, the internal organs of the fish, peel the skin, scrub the outer flesh and the inner area near the intestines, and thoroughly clean the mouth and the gills. And those that want to be more lenient may just simply discard the head rather than cleaning all the areas near the mouth and the gills where worms are commonly found. There is one halachic question that concerns salmon and other fish such as herring. These fish swallow tiny parasites, which themselves have ingested microscopic larvae. Inside the fish's intestines, these larvae develop into what is called anisakis worms. And these worms can grow up to 10 centimeters in length. That's about the width of your hand, and are somewhat transparent. It's hard to see. While the fish is alive, the worms remain in the intestines. But when the fish dies, if you don't immediately freeze the fish, the worms can migrate into the intestines or from the intestines of the fish into the flesh. And some argue that since the larva began developing outside the fish, they are already considered something that's asur, prohibited, making it very necessary to ensure that the salmon and or herring fish are free of these worms. Others say no, that because the larva started off initially extremely microscopic, 0.1 millimeters inside, so small that even if a person were to dissect the tiny parasite that swallowed them, they would be undetectable. Therefore, they're not considered forbidden. And therefore, consequently, these worms would follow the same rule as the worms that develop within the fish's flesh. And if they don't leave the flesh, then they are not prohibited. The halacha follows the lenient ruling because the larva was microscopic before entering the fish's intestines, and therefore considering as having developed within the fish. But the custom is to be strict here in this situation, not only due to the strict halachic opinions, but also because these worms are large, and therefore, when they are large, they are more repulsive, and they also probably possess health risks as well. So therefore, the custom is to make sure that these are all clean and not to eat these worms. This concludes our three-part series on bugs. There's a lot that we covered here. There's a lot of misconceptions and what people are told must be followed, which is not necessarily true. This is all part of our Kosher Curiosity series. A lot of people ask these questions about bugs. A lot of people are unaware of what the halacha actually dictates. Again, if people want to be strict and not eat certain fruits such as strawberries or guavas or figs or lettuce and broccoli, that is up to them. According to halacha lema'aseh, however, these fruits and vegetables may be eaten, and generally we just wash and rinse them well. And the reason why they can be eaten is because these bugs cannot be seen. Wishing everyone a wonderful night, and stay tuned for as we continue next part of this series, Bezrat Hashem, in the near future. Be well.